But welcome. Thank you guys all for making some time to talk about one of our favorite subjects, gardening and urban agriculture. My name's Skylar. I'm the president at the Urban League of London, and we host these monthly meetings. So if it's your first time coming and joining us, welcome. It's the last Thursday of the month from 7 to 9 p.m. and we have been doing them virtually because of COVID. Although our June AGM will be our first in-person event. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that a little bit later, but mark it on your calendars. It's June 22nd. So that will be our first in-person event. I would like to start off the meeting by acknowledging the land that we're gathering on. Many of us are gathering in London, and the three longstanding Indigenous groups of this area are the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Lenape peoples. And it's important, I think, at the beginning, especially of a talk where we're talking about urban agriculture and the use of land, that we acknowledge these First Nation communities that are neighboring the City of London, the Chippewa of the Thames, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation, because peoples from their communities have been stewarding the land for a very long time, much before a lot of us have been here. And we do recognize that as the Urban League, both as members and our community, we have a role in playing in developing the relationship building and reconciliation process, and it has to be based on action. So a lot of that we can talk about when we're talking about land. So welcome, thank you for joining us. Again, like I said, my name is Skylar, I'm the president of the Urban League of London, and I'm going to pass it over to Jane to get started with the speakers. And then, of course, everyone is welcome to stay, but later on this evening, we'll have a business portion where members are voting on various topics. But everyone is welcome to stay. So Jane, over to you for the speaker portion.
Well, thanks so much, Skylar. And I'll just go over how we're going to sort of organize this evening. We've got three wonderful guests tonight, and each one of them is going to talk about something just a little bit different. And then afterwards, we're going to have some opportunities for questions and answers while we have these wonderful people here. I know that I've participated in at least two of their workshops for two of them before. And I love talking about gardening, and I can't think of a better day than today to talk about it. So we're going to get started tonight with Becky Ellis. And Becky Ellis is the owner and operator of Entangled Roots, a small-scale farm and beekeeping operation. And as an aside, she's also the person who started the London Urban Bee Cooperative, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. I was part of that group, and she was one of the people who formed that up. She has an MA in anthropology and a PhD in geography from Western University. Her academic work focuses on community gardening, urban commoning, urban beekeeping, and pollinator gardening. She has a wealth of experience, and she's responsible for a number of pollinator gardens here in the city. And so we're going to listen to Becky and hear a little bit about her perspective on urban gardening. And then we'll follow up with Jessica and Christine, and I'll introduce them shortly. Becky?
So thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I'm going to just talk a little bit about my perspectives on urban agriculture based on my own experience, but also my academic research. And yeah, hopefully that will be a good introduction to the topic for the rest of our conversation tonight. So cities are vibrant, diverse places that are full of resources. They have the potential to be spaces of belonging, of abundance, and of what I like to call multi-species flourishing. And I think that cities are some of the best places to engage in agriculture for a whole bunch of different reasons. But I'm going to focus on three of the things that I think are the most wonderful benefits of urban agriculture. And these pictures, by the way, this little mini city diagram is something some people made in a participatory project in Hamilton. And then these two bees are native bees from my backyard. And then this is a garden sign of, I believe it's the River Forks Community Garden here in London. So a thing that I think is really important to understand about urban agriculture is that cities have always contained agriculture. So the earliest archaeology of cities, there was urban agriculture happening. There's indications of all sorts of different kinds of gardens. Orchards are really common to have in the archaeological records, some indications that there were orchards. And then also animals that we often think of as not belonging in cities. And in many places in the world, urban agriculture has always been present in cities. It was partially removed in some North American cities in the mid-20th century. And that has to do with a lot of things, complicated issues, things about suburbanization of cities, things about campaigns to quote unquote clean up cities. Sometimes campaigns targeted against poor people and sometimes targeted against newly arrived people from different areas of the world where they were engaging in different kinds of urban agriculture. So it was problematic, I would say, that agriculture was removed from some cities. Urban agriculture has a lot of benefits, and these are just a few of them. But these are some of the benefits that there's a lot of academic literature in the social sciences about, including some of my research falls under some of these categories. So some of the benefits of urban agriculture is that it promotes food security and food justice. It builds neighborhood community and democracy. It increases biodiversity in cities. It nurtures connections to other people, to urban spaces, to non-human nature, and to food. And it promotes mental and physical health. The mental health piece is something that I think is sometimes ignored because people talk about, that people might eat healthier diets or might get some exercise, but a lot of gardeners who fill out surveys about the benefits of gardening talk about mental health as a main benefit of urban agriculture, especially community gardening. I'm going to focus on a few of these points. And what I want to focus on is that concept of promoting neighborhood democracy and participation. So I think urban agriculture can be a part of what some people call right to the city movements. So David Harvey, who is a geographer, a very influential human geographer, says the claim of right to the city is to claim some kind of shaping power over the processes in which our cities are made and remade, and to do so in a fundamental and radical way. And the thing about urban agriculture is it does involve people coming together and deciding that they want to do a specific project in a specific place in the city. And in many cases, they take that place and turn it into a really vibrant and dynamic community space. And they are actually physically remaking the space when they engage in urban agriculture and urban gardening. So right to the city movements for people who use that concept are movements that are grassroots, that are democratic, and involve people collectively coming together to have a say in what happens in their neighborhoods. And so I think urban agriculture, like I said, is a really powerful way for people to do that. And sometimes, this is an example from New York City when the community gardens that people had created in vacant lots in the 1990s were going to be destroyed en masse to make way for the building of very large buildings. Sometimes, people defend urban agriculture projects through activism as well. So it can really spark a sense of right to the city in that way as well. I also think a really amazing benefit of urban agriculture is it can connect not just to food security, but to food justice. So Just Foods is an organization that focuses on food justice, and they define food justice as communities exercising their right to grow, sell, and eat healthy food. Healthy food, they define as fresh, nutritious, affordable, culturally appropriate, and grown locally with care for the well-being of the land, workers, and animals. People practicing food justice leads to a strong local food system, self-reliant communities, and a healthy environment. So food justice with a focus on environmentally sustainable and socially just practices is really important to actually having food security. So I think urban agriculture can be a really important part of that. And then when it comes to multi-species flourishing and connection to non-human nature, urban gardens tend to be diversified polycultures. So polyculture is the opposite of a monoculture where you're growing just one thing or just allowing one thing to grow. A polyculture is when there's a whole diversity of plants growing, and that provides really good food and habitat for a whole bunch of different animals, including people. But I studied bees for my PhD, and these habitats are, if you look at the scientific literature, are often considered to be some of the best places for bees. So in this picture is the little greenhouse there, the little tiny greenhouse is my own backyard. This is a community garden in Toronto called the Milky Way Garden. This is a community greenhouse in Trinity Bellwoods Park in Toronto. And then this is another picture of the Milky Way Garden where I did a lot of my research. There are some obstacles to urban agriculture. And sometimes overcoming those obstacles can be part of creating a democratic neighborhood where you talk things out with your neighbors. Sometimes that's not always possible, but a huge obstacle that we could talk about in discussion, I won't focus on too much, but is lack of land. I would say lack of land or lack of access to land or lack of land that has a proper zoning to do the things you want to do is a huge barrier to urban agriculture, maybe the main barrier. There are also deeply embedded cultural values, I would say in Canada and United States, about what and who belongs in cities when it comes to urban agriculture. So I don't want to reopen old wounds, but you may know in London, there's always been this problem with people opposing backyard chickens. And, things like, sometimes people who are interested in urban gardening and creating spaces for the wild let things like dandelions grow, and that can cause some conflict with neighbors. Sometimes people don't like things like greenhouses that they consider an agricultural type of thing. They don't like to see that in residential spaces. So there's a whole bunch of cultural values that we have to push against when we're interested in urban agriculture. And then there are restrictive bylaws and laws. I've had a few entanglements, although to be fair, I knew I was breaking the Ontario law when I had bees in my backyard. But, it's not only that we have to push back against cultural values, sometimes the cultural values have made their way into various levels of government. And so that's something that people have been pushing back against. In London, we've had some success with that when it comes to some things. So that's also certainly something that I'd love to discuss in the discussion portion. And I just want to briefly talk about urban commoning. So urban commoning is when people commoning in general is when people are sharing either land, a resource, a skill, sharing knowledge. Some people talk about seeds and seed sharing as commoning in terms of knowledge. But commoning of land is a really great thing in urban public spaces. Especially when we not only have a public space, but when we come together and engage in placemaking in that space. And placemaking is when you take public places and make them into community spaces. So gardens are spaces in which people can create, I think, really great commons, and not just for each other, but it can also involve non-human animals as well, and nature. So gardens are spaces in which people can connect with one another and with non-human nature, food, and land, and can share those things commonly. Cities are really distinctive because of their heterogeneity. And a really wonderful thing about the type of community that can be built in public commons is that it can be community that's not about sameness, like we are not all coming together because we're the same, we're really similar, but it can be about building community through difference. And I think for me, as someone who's been around community gardens for a long time, that's one of the most amazing things I love about community gardens, is that it brings together, we have a common interest of gardening, but other than that, there's so many different people that come together in community. And then gardens are spaces in which people can co-create with human natures, non-human animals and plants. And in that way, if you consider yourself sharing with non-human nature, they can become multi-species commons as well. And I think there's a lot of potential in commoning when it comes to front yards. So these are some examples here in London at various times, and even backyards where maybe you can share or sell some of your food or share your knowledge. And these are some examples of some great commoning exercises when it comes to public parks and spaces. So this is the Milky Way Garden in Toronto, the Hope Garden in Toronto, and this is that community greenhouse I was talking about, which I think is a really cool project in Trinity Bellwoods Park. And the urban farms can also be spaces of calming. This is from Black Creek Community Park, our community farm in Toronto. Urban Roots Farm here in London is another great example of growing food that is affordable for people, that is accessible for people. People can see visibly urban agriculture on a larger scale taking place. And a lot of times these spaces are also spaces where there are community programs that happen and people can create a sense of connection to the farm. And one exciting thing that I'd be really happy to expand more on if people want, but there has been a move in Toronto with the Milky Way Garden as an example of people turning urban agriculture projects into community land trusts. So this particular garden is in it was a vacant lot. It wasn't neglected by the owners, but the owners owned another property behind it and needed zoning permission to build something they wanted to build there, and they couldn't get the zoning permission. So they allowed this ESL class from the Parkdale Public Library to have a garden, and they had a garden for many years. And then an organization called the Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust brought the community together, brought the gardeners together from that ESL class who'd been gardening there for a long time, and came up with this project to turn this into a community-owned land trust. And they raised money in the community, they bought the land from the owners, and they have plans to make this into an urban agriculture hub, but also retain space for those original gardeners who have nurtured this land for about 14 years now. And an interesting thing about the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust is they also are interested in buying rooming houses in the Parkdale neighborhood where there is gentrification going on, and turning them into democratic spaces of affordable housing for people. So this urban agriculture project is directly connected to an affordable housing project based on a community land trust that at its heart values commoning and also participatory democracy. So I found a lot of inspiration in that. And I think that's a really interesting thing when we think about creating these types of things in land that is not publicly owned. There is potential for urban-based community land trusts. So that's what I'm going to talk about now, because I don't want to take up too much space, but I also really invite any questions people might have. This is my email address and my website, and you can find Entangled Roots on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. And I'm going to ask everybody if they could hold their questions until the end. I think we'll go through the three presentations and then we'll sort of field the questions kind of in panel format, if that's okay with the other presenters. And we're going to hear from Jessica now. And Jessica Cordes comes to us. She is the Sustainability Engagement Coordinator at Western, and she's also the chair of the London Food Policy Council. In addition, Jessica's been doing some interesting things in her own home in the Glencairn area. She has been changing her backyard into a garden, and she has also been she's also been selling the food from her backyard with some of the new policies that have changed here in London. In addition, she's also putting on workshops on seedlings and seeds and how to start your own gardens here in London. So we're going to hear from Jessica right now. Thanks so much for coming tonight, Jessica.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks so much for having me. I think I'm a co-host, so I'm just going to quickly share my screen here. All right, so thank you, everybody. And I'm going to, like Jane said, take a little bit of a different perspective and talk more about growing and selling food at home. Okay, so I just wanted to take a quick moment and share a little bit about kind of what got me interested in gardening and growing food. I didn't come from a farming background, didn't grow up around gardens and everything like that. So in my early 20s, I spent 4 years traveling and working abroad. actually really embarrassed to say that I was an extremely picky eater before I started traveling. Did not want to try a lot of foods, but being in a lot of different countries and experiencing various ways that food is produced, prepared, and enjoyed really helped me to grow an appreciation for diverse foods and really opened my eyes to the wonders of growing food. So I then spent about a month volunteering at a permaculture eco camp in Malawi, where I was introduced to the idea of permaculture and how growing food together as a whole system can be a very sustainable and really efficient way to produce food. So then my garden began just 4 years ago in my home here, and I have lots of photos like Becky. I love using PowerPoint, mostly just for the photo aspect of it. And then a lot of what Becky was saying really resonated with me too, in terms of why I choose to grow my own food. So connecting to the land really ties into what she was saying about the mental wellness benefits and the experience of nature in your backyard. That to me is truly the most important reason of what I enjoyed. But there is also a big element of building community, even out of just my own backyard. It's enabled me to connect more with neighbors, share food, and kind of talk about that process. Doing my part for resilient and sustainable communities is a really important part of it as well. Like Jane said, I'm working in sustainability and local food systems with my volunteer work with the Food Policy Council. And I do think there's a lot of opportunity for us to strengthen the local food system in our region. We're so lucky to have access to some of the richest, most fertile soils in Canada and around the world. So we have a great opportunity to grow in urban areas. We get to eat lots of healthy, affordable local food by growing it ourselves, and also access more varieties of foods by finding some unique seeds and saving those seeds and having a little bit more security and choice in what we eat. And not to spend too much time on the kind of scary side of it and some of the unfortunate stats, but these are things that I absolutely keep in mind and are also an important reason of why I think urban agriculture just has so much potential and something that is near and dear to my heart. Locally in London, the Middlesex London Health Unit has found that 1 in 7 households are food insecure. And looking at the provincial scope in Ontario, 175 acres of farmland are lost every day to urban development. And to me, that is just absolutely astounding. On a national scale, 58% of food that's produced in Canada gets wasted. And globally, agriculture has a huge impact with carbon emissions, biodiversity loss, soil health. So the food system, the food choices that we make really are important on so many different levels. Now kind of shifting gears a little bit, and I want to show you a little bit about kind of my operation and what you might consider if you want to get started yourself. So this is a photo of our current seeds taken maybe about a week or 2 ago. And this is a setup that I have going on with my family. So it is a great way to either partner up with some friends or family. You don't have to do it all alone. I chose to go with grow lights, but you could also do this against a windowsill. If you are using a windowsill, it's really important to rotate the plants around so that they do get even light. But it's a fairly simple setup, just with some metal shelving, these seed trays that you could purchase at any kind of garden supply store, and seeds, of course, and the soil. I just want to put in a plug with the seeds for Seedy Saturday, which is coming up April 23rd. Like Becky was saying, it's a really great way to experience perhaps some commenting and sharing seeds and getting to know other gardeners in the area. The soil, you just need the seed starting mix, and light, like I mentioned, either windows or grow lights. Whatever it is, really important not to take seedlings and just plant them outside immediately. They need some time to get adjusted to the outdoors. And this is one of the lessons that I've learned over time is over the course of a week or 2 weeks or so, you might take your plants outside for a day or for an hour first one day and then 2 hours the next. The wind and the sun are totally different from the indoor conditions. So they just need some time to harden off. And that's one way that you're going to end up with much stronger plants over the course of the season. And when you're watering, another thing is it's not going to be the same amount of water throughout the season. So when the seedlings are really small like this, they have very shallow roots. So it's just a little bit of water every day to keep them moist. But as they get bigger and stronger, you don't want to overwater. Loving too much is what kills most plants, actually. So I just wanted to show this as kind of a comparison from the seedlings to this lush full garden that grows. It is truly a wonder to grow things from seed, and I think anybody can do it. You don't have to grow something so big, but it is actually really, really cool to see them go and start to sprout up in their seedling trays and then flourish and deliver so much beautiful food over the course of the season. For me, when I got started, like I said, I was totally new, had no background in growing, but there's a lot of amazing resources out there, YouTube, there's so many videos. And one that I have learned a lot from is MI Gardener, Michigan Gardener. There's also some wonderful local organizations like Friends of Urban Agriculture has a Facebook group where you can post lots of questions, get lots of resources on their website. Same with the Food Policy Council, the local urban farm, Urban Roots, and Entangled Roots as well. But truly the most valuable way to learn is through trial and error. With gardening, I've found that it's really best to start small, try something, and you learn from it. Every single year, I learn something and take something new away. The key tips, start small. I probably bit off a little more than I can chew, which is why I ended up selling a fair bit. But it worked out that way. But a lot of people I've talked to are a bit intimidated to start growing from seed. I think it's worthwhile just to try it. Even if it's seeds, there are lots of different types of ways of growing seeds. So some plants need to be started earlier indoors, like in those trays that I showed you. Those would be peppers, tomatoes, things that need a little bit more time to get started. Other things you can just sow right out into the ground and they will grow themselves over the course of the season. For example, carrots are a great one to grow. You just sprinkle them loosely over the top of the soil and wait. Same with lettuce and different types of herbs as well. So try it out, whether it's one or two things that you get going in. And when you see them coming up, it's a wonderful feeling. Trying new techniques, something that I have played around with is the spacing of plants over time. The very first year, everything was spaced way too far apart. You end up doing all kinds of weeding because the soil's not covered up. And then last year here, things kind of got out of control. I could barely find space to walk through the garden. So it's a bit of a balance in that area. And also plants are hardier than you might think. I have had weeks on end that I haven't been able to water and tend the garden like I wanted to. So it says what you put into it, you get out of it. Yeah, and then when the bylaws changed and we were allowed to start selling food from our homes, I took advantage of that, and it was a wonderful experience to connect with neighbors. This was really what instigated a lot of community connections around my own backyard garden. It's a great way to raise awareness, to redistribute fresh, healthy produce, encourage a stronger local food system, and also offset the cost of the garden. So this slide just kind of walks through some of the policy and planning context. So we don't need to spend too much time going into it, but there has been a lot of movement around the local food and urban agriculture in London. So in 2011, the London Food Charter was endorsed. 2016, a community food assessment that led to the establishment of the Food Policy Council that I'm now chairing. London's Food Futures, a community-led conference on urban agriculture, very great way for people, for community members to come together and talk about what they want to see from urban agriculture. That led to the urban agriculture strategy getting endorsed. 2017, the steering committee was formed. And then in 2019 was when that bylaw change happened, where we were allowed to sell food from our homes. So farm gate sales, or also known as home gate sales bylaw amendment. And then in 2021, there's a brand new report about making urban agriculture easy. So some new bylaw changes that are coming into effect and changes to the London plan. Quick little table talking about some of the things, the rules to keep in mind if you're considering urban agriculture. So like Becky said, backyard chickens are not permitted in the city. Backyard bees, I believe the rule is that beehives must be 30 meters from property lines. So that makes it very restrictive. Most people don't have more than that amount of space on all sides of their property. And that comes from the Ontario Bees Act from 1990. So probably pretty outdated. Greenhouses are one of the things that was changed recently in the Making Urban Agriculture Easy document. And in backyards, 10 by 10 are allowed without a permit. And non-neighborhoods, now larger sizes, are allowed without site approval. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to sell food from community gardens, but selling from homes is allowed 20 times per year. That's only fresh food though. Any processed food has to be prepared and through a community kitchen and a retail space. And here I'm just have a couple of resources that Making Urban Agriculture Easy document, the City of London strategy, and some local groups. And I will thank you with that.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And as I said, if we'll have time for questioning in a little bit after we hear our final guest. And our final guest is also a member, board member of the Urban League. And Christine Mettler is part of Petersville Community Garden. And Petersville Community Garden is unique in that it is run by the community. The city is aware of what's going on at the community garden and has permitted it, but the city doesn't run it like it does some of the other community gardens. So Christine, we'll let you take it away from here, and then we'll have some time for some questions.
All right, I am also in the PowerPoint trained. So can folks see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Yeah, so Petersville Community Garden is it is a community-run garden, and I believe it is the first and only of its kind in London. And it started well about 3 years ago, although 2020 was our first gardening season. So it is in West Lyons Park, kind of close to the Riverside and Warncliffe area, and right next to the food forest, if folks know where that is. So yeah, so I'm on the steering committee of the garden, and I've been involved since fall of 2019, perhaps. Yeah, so basically I moved to London in the spring of 2019, and a few months later, I got a flyer in my mailbox. I actually live just down the street from the park, that there was a new community garden in town, and so I emailed the name on or the address on the card and started getting in touch with the organizers. So I would not say I'm a particularly talented gardener, but I did a bit of gardening at a community garden when I was in Toronto in my younger years, and I really enjoyed it. Although again, can't say I was particularly successful, but I did really like it, and I liked you know, going to a place where there are other gardeners and meeting people and that community aspect as well. So yeah, so I wrote to the email, I got a response, and basically I found out later that the community garden had been proposed by, well, it had started off by two community members named Jeff and Gabor that got together and decided that they really wanted to try to do communal gardening, where instead of having individual plots, that everyone was kind of working the land together. And so they got some other folks together that were interested and wrote the city. And I think there was about 10 people in total. And the city was supportive. Apparently they have been exploring the idea of community run gardens, and other cities do have community run gardens. I think a lot of Guelphs, potentially all of Guelphs, and Toronto's gardens are self-managed. I think you know, the city of London apparently, you know, subsidizes the plot or the cost of plots for the gardens that they run. So wanted to look into a communally run model and see how it goes, or at least not necessarily communally run, but community run. Yeah, so basically this area was all grass, and in the fall of 2019, a lot of the gardeners got together and put down cardboard to kill the grass. And then in the early spring, we put down, I think we also planted some things on the periphery in the fall. Also, I see that Susan Price, who is on the steering committee as well as here. So Susan, if I'm leaving anything out or just lying, please jump in and correct me. And so we planted some things around the periphery as well. And then in the spring, put down some cover crop. And then, and that, by that time it was 2020, so COVID had struck in obviously in 2020, and by March it was declared a pandemic, and nobody knew what was going on and what they were doing, and so we couldn't really, technically, we weren't supposed to get into the garden until late May of that year. I think the city wasn't totally sure what they were going to do and what they were going to allow in terms of allowing people into the gardens. But so it was a late start to the year, but we started in 2020, and so the city paid for topsoil to get us started. And there was apparently a lot of topsoil testing that was done. I was told that the area used to be a waste depot or something like that. But there was, really good topsoil testing done. But other than this soil from the city, everything else was done by the members. So it was really kind of spearheaded by those founding members and by Jeff. And at that time, we were trying to make decisions more or less collectively, but we didn't really have a model for what that looked like or how that worked. But we did everything in terms of kind of, opening our own bank account, member recruitment, actually kind of, doing the pathways in between the garden, putting down straws, all that kind of stuff. The city did bring in water, but we paid them to bring in water, and they brought some tanks, and then we also had some tanks provided by a member as well. So initially the idea was that we would have an area for kind of family run allotments, and then a communally gardened area, and that everyone who was involved in the garden would help out with the communally run area. And so this is what that looked like in 2020, and how we divvied up the plots and the communally run area. So all of the seedlings that were planted in the communally run area, apparently there was about 1,800 seedlings, were donated to us by Urban Roots. And and as things grew, all of the produce ended up being donated to various charities in the city. So it went to places like Growing Chefs, the Vegan Food Bank, Sanctuary London, Mission Services, My Sister's Place. And so, as I said, the idea was that all of the gardeners would, you know, contribute to this, and that everyone would put in time. But that didn't necessarily happen, and ultimately, a lot of the work did fall to Jeff, who was the garden coordinator at that time, and it was a big space. So the community, so on the other side of this water tank there are where the private or the kind of family owned allotments are, and this whole area here is communal, and it was a pretty big area, and it was really, really hard to upkeep. And yeah, it was a lot of work. And, you know, I think that COVID probably played a big part in that, and it really threw people's schedules off and their lives and everything off. So, so unfortunately, a lot of that work ended up falling to one largely, and then a few people. So something that we really learned in that first year was about needing to share the workload, and then also have reasonable expectations about what that workload was. So we decided that we would form a steering committee with different people taking on different roles. We also decided it would probably be helpful to have some kind of, you know, shared vision and values and processes. My own experience in grassroots community groups and organizing is that they usually work best when there are, you know, shared or agreed upon processes, but also friendships as well. And that was something that was interesting, is because most of the people that were involved in the garden, some of them knew each other, but a lot of them didn't. And so just kind of, you know, getting used to each other and feeling each other out, and even understanding, you know, what we're talking about and what we mean when we're doing this, and what our respective expectations were. We also had some, you know, interesting growing pains around members and memberships and what was expected of members. I think, you know, we coming into it, we didn't have those processes set up, so we were just kind of hoping that everyone would, you know, be an in good faith member and keep up with their plots and whatnot, and that wasn't necessarily the case. So there was a lot of back and forth about, like, what do we do about members who are not doing that, you know, are not responding? How do we, you know, keep track, or how do we kind of keep up with our values that we had decided, but also, you know, have some accountability of people. So there was a lot of kind of iteration of, you know, what those processes are, what they look like, and kind of negotiating with each other, especially as people that don't know each other and hadn't worked together before. So then we got through the summer of 2020 and struck the steering committee and had, you know, specific roles, so more people knew, you know, that this is my job and this is what I'm going to bring to this, instead of it, you know, falling largely on one person. That, you know, everyone is volunteer, of course, at this time as well. So we got together and decided what did we want to do for next year, and there were some more visions about what that might look like, and a lot of people were interested in continuing on with the communal aspect of gardening, instead of having everyone have, you know, little areas of their own, but that everyone could, or at least people that wanted to, could participate in the communal aspect as well. And instead of most of that produce going, you know, working and giving it away, that people could do it and communally garden for themselves and for each other. There's also a part of the garden that we did dedicate and work with Sanctuary London, and that was maintained also by Sanctuary. Unfortunately, we found that there just wasn't enough people that were interested in doing the communal aspect. I think we had maybe about 4 people, and it was a large area, and we just decided that, you know, it was unfortunately just too much given the circumstances for us to be able to do that. So we did some more recruitment and brought in people, and we found that most people just wanted their own garden plots. So, you know, some of us were disappointed about that and thought that's what made the garden really special, the aspect around the communal gardening, but it was hard given the circumstances of COVID, that we didn't really know each other and that we didn't have a process for how to do that. So ultimately what we did is we decided to divide it up into private allotments, and that people would all garden together, but it would still be run by the steering committee. And we still wanted to be able to have kind of more a community aspect to the garden as well. So here, this part here, this is I think like a drone shot that someone took. This whole part is the garden, and this whole part here is the food forest. Yeah, so this is part of the process of pulling weeds and you know, taking down the garden at the end of the year, and starting to mark out plots to have private allotments. So I guess in terms of some things that we've learned over the past 3 years, I mean, you know, COVID has been trying for everyone. I think people are really tired, and it's definitely been difficult to create the community that we hope for. We have had a hard time getting people on the steering committee, even gardeners, and you know, there's been some abandoned plots or folks that kind of went AWOL as well. And you know, understandably, a lot of people are dealing with a lot of stuff right now, and so, you know, but we aren't ready to give up on the community run aspect of that. And so what we've done is that we've asked the city to step up and play a bit of a larger role, particularly in helping to advertise and recruit members, and then also with maintenance and upkeep of the areas around the garden. And we definitely don't want to give up on the communal aspect. We just need to figure out, you know, what people have capacity for, what will work, what won't work. The communal gardening aspect is out for now, but it could definitely potentially be an option in the future if we had enough interest. Although it is harder to go from, it's harder to turn, you know, what's been private allotments into communal than vice versa. But yeah, but we're definitely not writing it out, especially if we had people who are interested in kind of reviving this and working with us, and especially like joining the steering committee. We've also been having discussions about our membership options, and looking at maybe having membership options for low income folks, where plot fees are waived to reduce financial barriers, or where we're maybe reserving plots for people who don't have yard space or what have you, and looking at this kind of equity issues. We're still having those kind of conversations within the steering committee. But yeah, that's a bit of lessons learned from our community run garden, and happy to, Susan, if you want to jump in and add anything as well. And other than that, we can have a discussion.
Thank you so much. So we do have some time for questions here at the end. I'll keep an eye on the chat, and I will try and direct it to one of our wonderful speakers tonight who can answer it for you. So if you've got a question, if you want to pop it in the chat, I'll take it from there.
Oh yeah, Susan reminded me, we also have plots available. So that's why my creepy slide said, join us, join us. We'd like you to join us. We have plots available.
Yeah, I've been chatting that on the side while you've been talking, Christine.
Yeah, I saw that. Thanks, Susan.
Oh, thanks.
Hey, Becky, whoops, I'm losing the chat here. Becky, can you tell me more about the photo that showed a children's garden?
So back in 2014 to 2016, well, I ran it 2014, 2015. So I started a children's garden program when the London Community Resource Center ran the community garden program on behalf of the City of London. So that was contracted out. And I approached that executive director at the time, and I got some grants that funded my position. So I did that for 2 years, and that was one of the gardens. Now, I do not think any programs like that happen at City of London Gardens, because they don't have like a staff person who is doing the programming like I was doing. I do know that Growing Chefs has gardens. They have like a children's camps, and they have a really great program where they are gardening and also then of course cooking. But I'm not sure if there are any other children's garden programs right now in the City of London, but they're so wonderful. I hope they are. It was a real joy to do that program.
And I know that you've started some pollinator gardens in schools, and I know a lot of schools do have pollinator gardens, but the vegetable gardens are a little bit trickier because of course it goes over the summer. So Colleen has a question. Are there any efforts to get more apartment complexes involved in community gardening? I don't know, whoever would like to field that. Jessica, I don't know if you know that from your work that you're doing.
Not that I know of, actually. No, I don't. Christine, do you perhaps have a closer connection to the community gardens?
Sorry, I missed the question. What was the question?
Are there apartment complexes that are starting their own community gardens? Is anyone aware of that?
It looks like there's some hands raised. Maybe people know.
If someone does know, they can just pop in right now.
Right now, as far as I know, I'm on the advisory committee for community gardens for City of London, and also garden ambassador, which is something they started a program last year. Each community garden has a garden ambassador, and right now we don't have any on our books right now. In fact, Cherry Hill, their developer just notified them last week they're losing their community garden this year. They were just notified last week, and that sort of thing. But right now, as far as I know, there's no new ones in the apartments. We're trying to encourage, try to get it into new buildings that are being developed, but some developers are not taking it yet. But we're still trying to push it right now.
Hey, there's a question. Also, thank you very much for letting us know that. Are there any safety concerns about front yard gardening, vehicle pollution, for example? So concerns with that.
There have been a lot of different studies trying to determine vehicle pollution on urban gardens. I've read a few of them in the literature, like empirical evidence. I think it's mixed. I guess the thing is that anywhere you grow food, there's problems of contamination that you don't bring on the site, but is there. For example, I rent an acre of land in the country on an organic farm, but you know, the river flows through the farm, and there's a lot of things that that come off of conventional farms in the area, like fertilizers, pesticides. You know, I study bees, and so those systemic pesticides find their way into land that they've not been used on. So I would say the biggest concern in urban agriculture in terms of health and safety isn't so much although I would put a garden away from, like, I wouldn't put on a really busy street a front yard garden that I'm eating from, but on just a normal, like a slow traffic residential street, I think that that's fine. I mean, you're already breathing in a lot of that stuff, but I would say that if you think you have heavy metals, especially lead, people should be cautious about. And if you are gardening on a space where, you know, like in the past, there has been, for example, an auto body shop, like a vacant lot or something, that is not a good space to grow food in the ground. But I think that, like, in Southern Ontario, there's a lot of things we can encounter. I would also, another thing I'd say, I guess, is I also would not forage food or put a food garden near railroad tracks. So there are a few things, but I think on a normal residential street, cars driving by, exhaust fumes is just okay.
Thanks, Becky. We've got a lot of questions here, so we'll try and get through them. And Skylar, if we have to shut down, let me know. This is from, whoops, I lost it. Suma, and she's asking, what issues do you see in the future relating to urban agriculture and climate change?
I'll take a first stab at that. And hi, Suma, it's nice to see you. Land use would be my first instinct. The way that we use land has a massive relation to climate change. So building in policy frameworks that make space for urban agriculture is really important. And I think that ties into the importance of building, I'm not sure the correct word, whether it's building code or the land use and requiring some sort of urban ag in new developments. But I think that's a really important piece. And I'll ask the other panelists if they have anything to try.
Okay, we'll just head on then. Thank you very much, Jessica. One of the things that with the new parking bylaws coming out and looking at parking downtown, we're trying to get them to add not agriculture, but at least some urban spaces in there, or green spaces.
Say something quickly there, Jane, about that. Agriculture, I think, is responsible for like 70% of land use conversion from like natural ecosystems into, you know, non-natural ecosystems. So, and land use change is a huge driver of carbon emissions. And, you know, I mean, agriculture is, but also the loss of the ability of the landscape to reabsorb that. So, and, you know, and so are urban developments. So if there's ways that we can, you know, combine them, because obviously lawns and empty grass spaces are not very biologically productive places. You know, they don't sink carbon emissions very well, and they're not socially useful either. So I think that there's definitely a lot of a lot of promise for bringing agriculture into you know, empty green spaces that aren't necessarily socially or ecologically useful at this time.
Okay.
I also
Thanks.
I'll add something about I think that when people engage in urban agriculture, they should also throw in some patches of native plants as well for native pollinators and birds that, you know, are facing tremendous pressures and will be facing pressures due to climate change in the future. And so just throwing in some patches of native plants is a really great thing to do.
Thanks. We have, I think it's going to be our last question as we're heading toward 8 o'clock. And I don't even, it's that deadly question. In general, what can we do to finally get backyard hens? I know it's an age-old fight, but it seems like a no-brainer to let people, even licensed registered, like a dog or cat, for example, keep hens. So the age-old fight to get chickens in our backyard, I don't know if anyone here knows if there's been any progress on that. Last I heard that it was a definite no last year, and if there was anything different that was happening with that.
I don't think there's anything happening at the moment. When I was chair of the Urban Agriculture Steering Committee, the planning department told us not even to go there as a committee. I think, though, that as climate change intensifies, people get more concerned about industrial animal agriculture. There's a lot of concerns about industrial animal agriculture in terms of pathogens. I think that more and more people will be interested in it. Toronto has a pilot program that, if successful, will see the largest state in Canada have backyard hens. I think it will come up again, but I think we would need staff to be a little open to it in the planning department, which as of a few years ago, they weren't. And we'll need to see city politicians who are open to it. In Toronto, the wards for the pilot programs, the city politician had to be in support of it. So I guess their office would field complaints. So I think it will come up again, but I think it's not, I don't know of anyone really pushing actively. And there's actually a really horrible bird flu right now that has just come up from the United States. That's going to be very serious this year for the poultry industry and for wild birds. So I don't think it probably will come up this year because of that bird flu.
Yeah. That's true. Well, I want to thank our three candidates for their wonderful presentations tonight. It's been great listening to all of you and as panelists. And I know there's still a lot more questions, but we do have to get on with our general meeting. Maybe we'll have to have a follow-up to this gardening when everybody's plants are growing so they can ask questions, what's going wrong in their garden. I know that would be one that I would like to attend. Anyway, thanks everybody. And for those who want to stay, we're going to continue with our agenda tonight, and we're going to get on to the business of the Urban League.